Hello and welcome to this session at the Energy Hub here across the Clyde from COP26. This hub organised by Renewable UK and Energy UK. I'm delighted today to welcome colleagues from Statkraft. I'm Keith Bell. I'm a professor of Scottish Power, professor of smart grids at the University of Strathclyde. I've been involved in the energy sector for quite a few years, and in particular this whole question of how we integrate more renewables, wind and solar, into the electricity system. And we're going to dig into some of the challenges around that, and in particular, how you operate the system and keep it stable, by reference to a project that Statkraft have been very closely involved with and have delivered recently. By coincidence, my name being Keith, this is located at a place called Keith, up in the north of Scotland. And I'm joined to talk about that, in particular, by Guy Nicholson, who is someone I've known for a very long time, Guy.
Thank you.
And yeah, it's a pleasure to be on this panel with you. So you want to just introduce yourself briefly and your role in Statkraft?
Yeah, Guy Nicholson. I'm head of grid integration at Statkraft, and my role is developing these projects to create what Keith is talking about, the smart grid, and integrate lots of renewables into the grid.
Great, and I'm also joined by Lucy Kent. So yeah, your role in Statkraft?
Hi Keith, my name's Lucy Kent and I'm a senior project developer at Statkraft. I'm working on the Greener Grid Park projects, so taking a project from acquisition all the way through to construction. And
Duncan Dale.
Yeah, hi Keith. Yeah, my name's Duncan Dale. I'm responsible for the market-facing part of Statkraft. So we provide route to market so people can monetize these new renewable assets, be they wind or solar, or indeed inertia projects like this one.
So you've told me that Statkraft is, well, Europe's leading renewable energy company, I think, in terms of the energy produced. So it's a fantastic kind of foundation to be building on, to getting into something, you know, quite novel, like this stabilizer. So, Guy, you want to tell us a bit more about the project and what motivated it?
Great, thanks, Keith. And perhaps I could start by going into a presentation. So it's really about innovation on the grid and how we are developing the grid and the services and the technologies to integrate renewable energy. So fantastic that we've got so much renewable energy on the grid that we've got to deal with the challenge of integrating it at a high level. So that's what the story is about today. And let's start with Statkraft, as you say, Keith, Europe's largest renewable energy generator. And that's largely down to our Norwegian roots, our Norwegian hydro generation, and we are owned by the Norwegian government. We also big developer in the UK, and you can see a lot of the projects we have in the UK. We have hydro, wind, solar developments, and some of the greener grid parks that Lucy referred to earlier. So in terms of that, what I really like to focus on today is the Keith Greener Grid Park and project, stability project. And to kind of set the scene for that, let's talk about why it's needed. So this very complicated slide here is about one of the days in last year, in 2020, during lockdown. It was one of the periods in early spring where we had high levels of renewables on the grid and relatively low demand. So this kind of paints the scene for what we're going to see a lot more of in future. You know, it's a bit like zero coal days. You know, we started with the first day on the grid with no coal, and everyone made a big thing about that, and then it grew, you know, the first weekend and then the first week and the first month, so on. So we see more and more, have seen more and more low coal, zero coal days, and this is what's going to happen with renewables. We're going to see more and more times on the grid where renewables can supply all our energy. And the thing about this day was that we had enough renewables to supply the whole of the grid without having to run any fossil fuel generation. So we had enough renewables, some nuclear, some interconnection. And the market said, no fossils, we don't need any fossils. But National Grid had to intervene and said, well, that's all very well, market, but the grid won't be stable, won't be able to operate, it'll fall over, there'll be a blackout. So National Grid had to turn on 17 gas-fired power stations to deliver the stability that they need. And in doing that, they had to turn off a lot of renewables to make way for those gas-fired power stations. because those power stations can't deliver the stability services without also generating energy, which wasn't needed. So this is the scenario that we've seen, and it is painted by this picture, which I'll not follow in detail, but it shows the actions that National Grid had to take, turning down renewables, reversing flows on the interconnectors, and turning on CCGTs to provide stability. And the result of that is shown in this chart here, which is, it's a year old or so, but it shows the costs of operating the grid. And you expect the cost to be higher as we get high demands because you've got to bring on more expensive plants. But what you don't expect is the cost to go right up at low demands. And why is that? That's because at low demands, we've got a lot of renewable generation, a lot of embedded generation, and National Grid is having to take the kind of actions that we've seen on the previous slide. So, you know, we're seeing the costs of operating the system being similar to the cost of energy at these low demand periods. And that's because we don't have the right technology, the right kit, the right equipment on the grid to deliver it that at low cost. So it's a temporary thing. It's something we're going to fix, and the Keith project is about doing precisely that. So here it is, Keith Greener Grid Park. I think the thing to notice about this project is that it's now 2 years since National Grid launched the tender for this service. And here we are today commissioning the project. This photo is a couple of months old. We're now in the position of commissioning the project 2 years later. So it's a phenomenal timescale, considering this project didn't exist in November 2019 when National Grid announced a tender. And we won a contract in January 2020, which was great. And then we had to, in that timescale, do our planning variations, our grid connection, and our balance of plant and our equipment orders and contracts. And the reason we were able to do this in the tight timescales for that stability tender is because of we had an ongoing relationship with GE to deliver these kind of machines, because we saw this need coming not only in the UK but Ireland, but and other potential jurisdictions. So we were developing the technology and developing the contracts for that to enable us to do that. So what is Keith doing? It's delivering inertia primarily. So we've got a very large synchronous compensator called a rotating stabilizer, and it's been built in Rugby in Britain, and also with a key forging made by Sheffield Forge Masters. And and we're on site now commissioning that project. So when this comes online, it will supply enough inertia to displace a power station. So one of those 17 power stations that we saw was called on the system last year won't be needed because this project's there. And so it's not generating any energy, it's just importing energy from the grid to spin it round and provide that inertia and that synchronous machine that all the old power stations have, but that the new wind, solar, interconnectors, batteries don't have. So it's fulfilling a need for the grid to provide that stability. And in terms of where that's going, this is all about National Grid having this fantastic target for 2025 to be able to operate the grid zero carbon. So if we go back to last year and move that forward to 2025, National Grid want to be in a position to operate the grid without having to turn on any of those 17 fossil power stations when we get into the same situation as we were last year. So, and Statkraft, we are developing a number of greener grid parks where we look to build equipment, deliver these services to enable National Grid to operate the system in zero fossil fuel mode. So, yeah, that's the story, and that's what the project's all about.
And it's in the process of being commissioned. Right.
It is, yeah, right now.
And it expects to be finished by...
Well, so we hope to be operating before Christmas this year.
Okay.
Yeah, delivering the services.
Yeah, very good. And that, I remember it's worth unpacking a little bit what we understand by National Grid, the system operated ESO, by zero carbon operation in 2025. So it's like, if the market, the wholesale energy market, isn't using fossil fuels, in order to operate the system operator isn't going to change that. They're not going to bring on fossil fuels, and this sort of stabilizer helps them to do that, doesn't it?
Exactly, and it's probably worth, yeah, as you say, picking that from net zero or 2035 when we want to have zero carbon electricity.
Yeah.
This is the first step, you know, to get to zero carbon electricity, we need to be able to operate the grid without fossils in the first place, and we can't even do that at the moment, but this project is a stepping stone to enable us to do that and enable National Grid as the system operator to not have to turn on those power stations, charge increased PSUOS charges, put on everybody's energy bills. It will be a lot cheaper
so
way of operating
charges,
the system.
that's the charges for, you know, the kind of the cost of balancing the system is then recovered by the system operator from everybody else.
Yeah, exactly.
So you want those costs to be, well, eventually it passes through to us as consumers. So this is going to help reduce that cost significantly.
Exactly, and you know, National Grid said up to £128 million of savings from all the projects in the Stability Pathfinder Phase 1 tender.
And it's interesting you said you've identified this need also in other systems, and you'd already been talking to GE about this technology. So what's particular about the technology, and is it really a similar sort of objective in these other markets?
Yeah, so the technology it's very high inertia. It's a synchronous machine, so it delivers the reactive power, it delivers the fault current, delivers inertia, has that stability, you know. So all the inverters and things, power electronics that connect the other technologies are all looking at that 50 hertz waveform, going, oh, we're going to follow that, guys. And if that waveform gets disrupted by a fault or disappears, then these other inverters go, well, we don't know where we are. So potentially that's what causes them to trip, you know, a bit like the 9th of August event, 2019. So yeah, the synchronous machine keeps that waveform going, allows the other equipment to follow it.
Yeah.
And to be honest, we thought the first need of this was going to be in Ireland, because obviously Ireland's an even smaller system to UK. But I think National Grid with the Stability Pathfinder Phase 1 have kind of jumped ahead of Air Grid in that sense and got the first one. And we are developing projects in Ireland to address a similar issue as well. The similar need is
and you would have learned from this project, I presume, you know, when you come to sort of maybe tendering for a project in Ireland.
Exactly, yeah. There's good cross-learning and feeding of all that knowledge and know-how,
Yeah, right. Well, we'll pick up some of those themes again, no doubt. We'll come and have a wider discussion with Guy and with Lucy and Duncan. But yeah, I mean, so you mentioned it was this stabilizer was built in Rugby by GE.
Yep.
So I think we've got a video now where we can see something about the construction at the plant in Rugby. So I think we've got a sense of the scale of the device there. You know, seeing the people walking around the factory and yes, I mean, this kind of extra mass. I mean, that was one of the novelties, wasn't it, Guy? That relative to a synchronous compensator, which is a technology that's been around for many decades, this is something a bit different. It's got that bit of extra mass which provides the inertia that you were talking about. I mean, was it easy? Well, I don't know. To what extent was that an existing product that GE had and you were pulling it off the shelf, or the specification of how much that extra mass should be? How much that was a kind of collaboration between yourselves and them?
Yeah, very iterative in terms of what the factory could handle. So it's a 200-ton rotor, and which is the maximum capacity in the factory to give that maximum inertia, as you say. And it wasn't a design that was off the shelf. Obviously, every synchronous machine is a synchronous machine. It's kind of same physics, but the construction of it is bespoke for the particular use and the particular application. So in this case, it was designed precisely to give us the inertia and the products that we want for this, which fit into the stability tender. Yeah, it was designed before the stability tender came out, and that was our advantage. We were ahead of the game when the tender came out 2 years ago. We're already working with GE on this.
Yeah, and I think I remember talking with you about it at the All Energy conference, quite a while back in those dim, distant days before the pandemic, when we could actually meet in conferences. So it was already sort of that idea was a twinkle in your eye at that point, and such a big bit of kit actually to be able to get it from the factory up to Keith is no mean feat. I can remember sort of specification of other kit going on the national grid where. They had to go for a particular type of equipment because they couldn't get it on a lorry and couldn't get it under certain bridges to kind of go to the right location. So we're going to see another video now which shows us that quite amazing journey from Rugby in the East Midlands all the way up to Keith in the Grampians. pretty impressive to see all those big bits of kit. Certainly, I'm speaking to someone who spends all day sitting in front of a computer. Yeah, great to see the kind of the outdoors. I mean, I don't know how long they waited to get a clear day to show all that, but anyway, they managed. So that was the product of, yeah, quite an unusual tendering exercise. I mean, I think the first time that the system operator has gone out and issued a tender like that for, yeah, hardware to be installed on the network that isn't owned by one of the regulated utilities. So I want to turn to Lucy now. So that was a relationship you had to strike with the electricity system operator in getting that project away. So what was that like as an experience? What did you take from it as a process?
Well, our relationship with National Grid and ESO has been great, especially during this Stability Pathfinder Phase 1 process, and we have monthly reporting with them, and it is excellent. However, there could be some improvement, there could be some long-term visibility, because National Grid, they dictate where our sites are located, so there's a locational factor that we need to think about, and also a timing factor, which would then help us with our future developments.
Right, so planning of the procurement, I mean, it takes, actually this was pretty quick. I remember a guy was saying it was, 2 years from the tendering exercise to, well, almost now to commissioning. But it's still a finite time that has to be gone through.
Absolutely. So in November 2019 is when the tender came out, and we submitted our bid in January 2020 for it to be operational in 2021. So only just over a year to develop and construct and operate a project. So that's a small amount of time. And we're experiencing this actually not just on the Stability Pathfinder Phase 1 project, but actually Phase 2 and Phase 3 projects as well. There's been a delay on those 2 extra Pathfinders, and they're now running in parallel. But a Pathfinder is meant to be something you can learn from. You learn by doing. And if the projects are going, or tenders are going to be running in parallel, then we don't learn. We don't get that experience. So it's definitely a factor that we need to consider the timing. And when National Grid are stipulating these very constrained time frames, it puts pressure on other areas like the planning sector, and our grid connection offers. They're working to quite tight timelines. And going back to the locational factor, because National Grid tell us where our sites need to be, once we know those locations, there's suddenly a boom of applications in one particular area, and it kind of spooks the councils. So and what we're experiencing at the moment is that councils maybe don't realise that it's not just one system we need in the area, it's multiple. So there's a race to get the application first, because councils might not accept more than one, and it's not a tick box exercise. We're trying to make sure that this is a movement, a local, regional, national movement, and so we need more than one application going through.
Yeah, and presumably you would like a bit more time to develop the relationship with the local authority, so they can get a better idea of the totality that they're being asked for.
And that takes time to do, and that's why we would like to ask for a really concise, clear 5-year plan from National Grid, trying to understand where the stability need is, where the locations of our sites are going to be, and the time frames, and where there's these 3 Pathfinders out at the moment, but what's next? That's what we need to know, because then we can start working with those councils early on.
So I think if I understand it right, the Pathfinder 1, which this project was part of, there wasn't a locational part to it. I mean, I think we were just talking before we came on air of the guy, why that particular location? So thinking that, like I say, there was a choice. Pathfinders 2 and 3, it is for a region, isn't it? Maybe we'll come back and talk about why. But how come?
Yeah, I mean, we were lucky. We had the Keith site, which we were developing for other reasons, and because, as you say, it was a non-locational tender, it fitted for us for that site. But as we see, Stability Pathfinder Phase 2 and Phase 3 have got these locational elements to them increasingly, but then National Grid chop and change how they see it. So it is very difficult to get the right projects in the right place at the right time, as Lucy says. And engaging with the local communities is important to get people on board with these new technologies to make sure that they're going to be accepted in the communities as well as the councils and the planning process. So it is. I mean, it's partly the fact that National Grid's got the 2025 target. So in a way,
they're not short of motivation, or they shouldn't be. Anyway.
Exactly, but yeah, I mean, fair dues. They've perhaps had COVID delays. We've certainly had COVID delays on site for the whole project. COVID hit just after we won the contract. I'm trying to convince, the powers in Statkraft back in Oslo that this crazy new idea is something to back, and we've got a COVID outbreak going on. So it's like, whoa, hang on a minute. So yeah, there were some challenges with the COVID delays for the project, but and National Grid, potentially have had some COVID delays here. But as Lucy says, this is really important that we get the right messaging from National Grid and don't keep chopping and changing the time frames, what they want, where they want it, and all that. It's very difficult.
I'm presuming that's the sort of thing you're saying to them. And what's the reply? I mean,
well, we experienced during the Stability Phase 2 tender that the location effectiveness factors changed mid-tender. So you have to start looking at different regions and start thinking about development in areas that you weren't looking at before. And we've experienced the same for Stability Phase 3, where National Grid published a map zoning areas that they were going to focus on. Those zones have completely changed now. So we're really having to redirect our efforts elsewhere in the UK.
I mean, some colleagues and I have been looking at the Pathfinder 2 in particular, and how it seems to affect Scotland and what the need is within Scotland. That's the main location. I think Pathfinder 3 is in Merseyside, is that right? Or something?
Well,
can't remember now, was it?
GB wide. England, Wales wide.
Right.
But no, as Lucy said, certain zones, and those zones have changed. So you're right. The Northwest was a key area. And suddenly, in the latest information, it's disappeared. There doesn't seem to be any need at all. So it's very confusing. And National Grid don't publish any reasoning why they've changed it. That's sort of a frustrating thing. That they don't kind of say, well, this new information's emerged, so therefore this is what's happened. So we can understand what they're doing. It's just like, here's a new map with some different zones on. So that's the kind of challenging part of it.
Yeah. Ideally, we would have had one of them here to defend themselves, because I'm sure they are. I mean, I'm sure they are trying very hard to do all this. But we're in a kind of fast-moving industry, aren't we? And it should be moving fast. We had an announcement not very long ago from the UK government of, I alluded to it earlier, of zero carbon electricity. In fact, net zero. It could even be negative if we had enough bioenergy, carbon capture and storage by 2035. So that's at no point in the year, for no reason, would we have to burn fossil fuels to generate electricity. If we are going to, we'd have to capture the CO2. So I'm going to bring in Duncan now. So this is it's a big shift. It's going to take a lot of investment, isn't it?
It's a dramatic shift, Keith. It's absolutely amazing. What's great though, of course, is that wind and solar are the lowest cost forms of generation. So you've already solved the cost problem, and that is the solution to climate change. One of the issues, though, is managing to integrate that into the system. So you need flexibility on the system. So that can come in the form of batteries, which can respond very quickly and deal with this rock-off issue, the rate of change of frequency, which is also dealt with the inertia that you get from the Keith stabilizer. But you also need storage that lasts for a long duration. So that will most likely come from hydrogen. And there are two different forms of hydrogen: green hydrogen from electrolysis and blue hydrogen from carbon capture. And no doubt many of the people who are sitting at home listening to this may well have looked at the future energy scenarios that NGC have put together. An excellent piece of work and really thought-provoking and thought-leading. And you've got a number of scenarios, 4 scenarios in there, a sort of muddling through steady progression thing. One which is consumer transformation, where consumers start to really change their behaviour and react to prices on the system and have a lot more heat pumps at home. Then you've got a system transformation, which is around using more blue hydrogen. But the one The one that we would like to see is of course leading the way, which is where everything is done so much more quickly, where you've got vast amounts of solar and wind built. So you've got 30 to 60 gigawatts of solar, 30 to 60 gigawatts of wind, and you've got a system that's grown from currently 60 gigawatts to maybe another 25 gigawatts on top, with flexibility from heat pumps, from electric vehicles, which will be smartly charged and V2G. But even then, you've got too much generation compared to the demand on the system. You've got to put it somewhere. So electrolysis and making green hydrogen is a great solution for that, and it would be good to see that. But we're at the cusp of something really exciting, a complete transformation of our system over the next 10 years. And it has to be done quickly, because to get net zero on the power by 2035, it's not that far away compared to the life of these assets. So we have, Statkraft deal with a large number of investment companies who are looking at building these assets, and some of them are saying, look, if I can't see a path for this asset where I get my money back in 12 years, if I can't see whether it's hydrogen enabled or carbon dioxide sequestration enabled, I need a bigger return, which drives the costs up. So we need a lot more clarity over where these, how the hydrogen is going to be rolled out. Yeah,
and the length of the contract actually on the Keith project, how long is the contract for that? So you're kind of...
It's a 6-year contract.
6-year contract, right. So you're able to recover your investment over that 6-year period. But like you were saying earlier, you want to get some sort of clear pathway of the pathfinders for other things coming along, because we know that kind of stability of the system, how to operate it, is going to be key under those circumstances when it is windy and sunny. Like we were saying earlier, without having to run fossil fuels to provide those ancillary services.
But this, Keith, this is where we need to do something about the market design. At the moment, energy and inertia are bought at the same time. So, to deal with the rock-off and reduce largest inflow losses, plant is being brought out of merit and run. So if you had a separate price for the energy from the inertia, there would be a clear market for inertia and products like this. So when we invest in this project, we're saying, right, you get to the end of 6 years, there's no market unless NGC buys some more. Do we feel comfortable that NGC are going to buy some more? Not terribly. But if there's a clear market for it, although it might be a merchant market, we've got some certainty.
And the asset will still be there. It's got a longer lifetime, presumably, than 6 years.
Yes.
So you'll be looking for some other new contract to get some more value out of that existing asset.
But you need clarity. To invest in something like that, you either need clarity or you need a large rate of return. So you kind of, the clarity reduces the cost. And the other issue around the clarity of where this market for inertia might go is to do with setting the rock-off limits. Now that's quite challenging. So at the moment, as most of the viewers will know, you have to get to 50 hertz plus or minus 1%, and the rock-off, the rate of change of frequency, 0.125 hertz per second. But what will it be in the future? Maybe NGC will feel more comfortably, maybe the energy system operator will feel more comfortable with higher rock-off levels, but we need to set them. The more transparency, the more guidance we have over this, the more we're able to invest.
And in fact, Duncan, they are very recently just operating at higher rock-offs now, because a lot of that 1.25 hertz per second was driven by a lot of distribution-connected projects that were forced to have that protection put in to protect the distribution networks. I just had a text from a friend the other day who said, I remember going to National Grid's control room 25 years ago and talking about this issue, if you keep putting this protection on this plant, it's going to cause a problem. And it was, it's just wind and it'll go away. And that kind of stage where, system operators thought this was barking technology and didn't really take it seriously. And of course, it's grown and grown and grown. More of this plant on the system with these protection devices that are great if you have a local fault, but if you have a national fault, then suddenly you have a massive disconnection of all these small power stations, because they all think there's a local network problem, and then they all trip off. So that is now being, the ALMC accelerated loss of
Accelerated loss of
mains
mains.
program, or
Yeah, whatever the other bit of the
some acronym, has changed a lot of those settings.
Yes.
So National Grid now are able to operate the system at certain times at higher rock-offs. So we have seen that in the last couple of months. Yeah.
It's hard for them to verify, actually. I mean, this is a kind of another issue, I think, across the sector. There are so many different parties involved with different areas of responsibility that maybe don't always quite align. I mean, you kind of manage a lot of projects, Lucy, and then so that's quite an art of kind of making sure all these kind of ducks are in a row. The local authority, the kind of, I know we talked there, we saw the video there about getting all the things transported and getting the finance in place.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's a big issue around education with these local councils and stakeholders, because this is new technology, providing a new service. And so there needs to be some movement around educating the councillors.
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right, aren't you? Because when you talk to people about this new technology, it's what it's all about. They're starting to get used to renewable energy, but this new kind of kit, rotating stabilisers, batteries, and so on, is something for them, new for them to get their heads around.
Although there might be some national agendas on climate change and renewables, that doesn't trickle down to the local levels, to the local councils, and they're still kind of falling back on very stringent local policies that actually are not up to date. They don't include anything about the climate emergency. Often we do get a lot of support from councils. They are supportive of renewables, but what we just need to do is make sure that there is better education and to get these through such a lengthy system. There are, out of 404 councils, 300 have declared climate emergency, so it's amazing, but it's actually trying to reduce such a lengthy planning system and streamline it a bit better.
Yeah, just joining all that process up and saying, actually, this project is about addressing the climate emergency, even though it's not a renewable generator.
It's all part of that system to make it happen, isn't it? So,
yeah, and there's got to be a planning balance, because there's a lot of issues around the short-term problems like landscaping and transport, but does that outweigh the climate emergency? So you've got to really understand if those short-term issues, like in the context of the climate emergency. And
how important are they? How do you weigh them up?
Yeah, exactly.
And that comes back to central government, probably. I mean, the Scottish government sets planning policy here. Government down in England and Wales as well. I know that the Committee on Climate Change has recommended that the government establishes a net zero test in any of these sorts of kind of key government decisions, to kind of be able to see the bigger picture. But then I suppose it is up to us in the sector, isn't it, to try and explain how these individual bits of technology do relate to that bigger picture.
I think it was great what Duncan was saying about that, how we're going to get to zero carbon electricity, and how does that, we need to get zero carbon electricity to decarbonise the rest of the sector, the heating sector, the transport sector. And, so getting to that 2035 is zero carbon electricity, so we can do that is great, and all the
the other big challenge that we need on the system is actually the ESO is doing really quite well. It's the distribution system operators that really we need to move to the next stage. And if you look at where we're going with so much heat exchangers and with solar at home, 7 to 30 gigawatts of solar at home, they'll need to have batteries, because there's going to be a whole bunch of solar at utility scale too. So the value of electricity at noon is going to be zero. Electric vehicles all parked at home. The distribution system is going to need to be so flexible compared to where it is now. So Ofgem are looking at steps forward about looking at regional demand-dominated zones and generation-dominated zones. And they've looked at around 800 of them at 132 substation level. But currently what we have are red, amber and green rates. Moving to a signal that depends on what the balance is in each of those nodes will really help. But then that needs to interact with ancillary services at local level and energy wholesale market optimization at grid level and balancing market. So what you may end up with is sort of lots of little nodes, lots of little pricing in different areas to allow that sort of flexibility to be exploited.
Yep. And that raises opportunities, I guess. If you are an operator of something that can operate flexibly, I mean, you know, you're trying to manage the power flows, wind and solar output is varying, the demand is varying. So if you know how to make use of something like a battery in real time, then you've got a chance of adding real value.
Very glad you mentioned that. So we've so Statkraft's developed a trading platform. It's called the Unity Trading Platform. We have 20,000 megawatts of renewable energy connected to it all across Europe, and so it balances wind and solar in real time from the day-ahead market intraday and into the BM, and also optimises between those markets and the ancillary service markets, and BM for transmission constraints. So if you've got a lot of plant up in Scotland, there are a lot of transmission constraints. But we've also put flexibility into it. So we've now got over 1,000 megawatts to add to the 4,000 of renewable energy that we've got in the UK alone. And it optimises the batteries to take advantage of those different markets. But the next challenge for us, as we evolve, is moving it into the distribution system. We can do some of the little grid constraints, so we've got some kit that's already connected, doing distribution optimization, but that bit is going to grow an awful lot more, and it's going to get more and more sophisticated.
And it's not really defined yet how that is going to happen at that kind of smaller scale within the distribution networks, is it? I mean, you've got the distribution network operators that want to become distribution system operators and have, you know, kind of more control over things. But then you've already got a kind of an optimization platform that, in theory, has some of the methodology already in place.
I think it's important that there is separation so that people can actually concentrate on the things that they're really good at doing. But the issue with the distribution system is actually seeing what's going on the distribution system. Actually, currently the operators are largely blind as to what's going on. So
it always seems shocking to people outside of the industry that you know, there isn't really very much real-time monitoring of the distribution network.
Correct. And
Fit and forget, wasn't it called?
Right.
The whole idea of building a network, you just design it for the worst case scenario.
There's a huge number of assets there. It's a lot of stuff, and they manage it, you know, under the old paradigm very efficiently.
Yeah.
But that paradigm doesn't work anymore, just as you were saying.
It's completely changing. It's completely changing. So the distribution system, I've heard people say it's clunky 1950s technology, but now it needs to dance on a pinhead and turn around several times. So it's a huge challenge. But to do that, you need to see what's going on, and it requires some quite substantial changes. I mean, the definition of a demand-dominated zone or a generation-dominated zone, it's not defined really. Do you mean over a season? Do you mean over a day?
It's likely
do you mean an hour?
to change a lot through the course of the day or course of the year. Yeah.
But the data, the amount of data that you need, and the optimization is just huge. So you need very large, robust platforms that can cope with vast amounts of data processing.
I can see some business opportunities there in terms of being able to handle all of that data if you can get it. I think the DNOs, I think probably in their business plans they're putting in and finishing off right now for the Rio ED2, you know, the kind of next round of the price control, which I think runs, 2023 to 2028 or something like that. My understanding is they have got quite a lot of, requesting a lot of funds to put in a lot more monitoring. So things should get better. Then it's a matter of who's going to make best use of the data, I suppose.
Yes. Yeah, there are many opportunities there. We have a corporate venture capital arm, and they invested in a small investment in a company called Depsys, and that's what they do. They install sensors, and they're on about 40 different grids at the moment.
Right.
And that makes a big contribution.
Yeah. And it seems to me as well that Statkraft in the UK market is unusual in already having experience of storage, albeit different form, from Norway. You know, the use of water. You know, plenty of hydropower there. Do you think there's anything that I'm going off script now, by the way, so I'm just catching up. So, do you think there's anything there to be learned about how you husband that resource, and when you kind of put it into the market, when you hold it back from the market? There must be quite a lot of learning. I think sort of strategic reserves over a kind of over a 10-year period.
I mean, there is, Keith. I mean, Statkraft's history. We're very God really smiled when he made Norway. He gave them oil and gas and lots of hydro and lots of trees. So a very fortunate country. But Statkraft's DNA is 125 years of flexible generation, and for traders, an option. Flexibility is all about an option. When do you run something? When do you not run it? And how do you monetize that optionality? And we're quite fortunate that that's in our DNA. So the lessons that we've learned from optimizing hydro across the year and across the day are the same lessons that we're applying again in our Unity trading platform and our flexibility business, which means that we can add more value for our customers.
And hopefully then pass through to the rest of us as energy users.
That's where it ends up
more
in
broadly.
the end. It all trickles down.
Yeah. Lucy, this stabiliser is not the only project that Statkraft is developing.
No,
of
we're
course.
developing many projects.
So I guess there's plenty of, hopefully there's plenty of wind farms still in the process of being developed. What's the market situation like? What's the pipeline like? Is there enough confidence? We've had a bit of a hiatus, haven't we? We had a block on, we had the end of the renewables obligation. We had a block on contracts for difference auctions being open to onshore wind. There was only offshore wind. And actually the offshore wind sector has been progressing very well. We have another auction round coming soon, which is opening up again to onshore. To what extent is the industry waiting for that auction and hopefully a few more after it? Or alternatively, just getting on with things on a kind of merchant basis? Are there enough buyers of energy out there who aren't going to just wait around for these central auctions? Is there enough confidence for you to be kind of kept busy as a project developer?
Yeah, absolutely. So Statkraft are developing wind, solar, greener grid parks, and our teams are growing and growing and growing. We've got wind applications in currently, planning applications that is. Our solar team is growing as well, and we're doing co-located projects. So I think there's lots of opportunities out there for multiple renewable projects, especially in Statkraft. So it's
and we've
quite
got to be a bit
times.
careful. If we overstate that, the government will say, there's no need for CFD auctions.
No, absolutely not. We need to encourage more renewables. Just because we've got a few projects doesn't mean that's the end. We need to keep going. We've got targets to meet and
true,
in a short amount of time. So yeah, there needs to be a push.
So you kind of see this all as part of a portfolio, all kind of backed by different sorts of instruments.
Yeah, absolutely. That's right. Spot on.
Right. Yeah.
Keith, if I may, I'd like to come in on that question as I'm on the market side. So
I was hoping you would. Yeah.
So what we're finding talking to our customers, both our downstream corporate customers and our upstream third-party developers, is that there is a big expectation from the CFD market, but it's working very effectively. So the CFD market, it's an auction, and it's going to clear at a very low price because there are so many projects bidding in. It'll be the best projects that get built. So it'll clear at a very low price, which is really great for consumers at home. And in fact, if you looked at the last quarter, the CFD subsidy actually paid money out because the power prices were so high and the strikes were so low.
The holders of the contracts are paying back to the government.
Yes,
actually.
Customers.
And that
eventually to us. Yeah.
And that all drips down, and that may well be that will happen more and more frequently in the future because the industry is getting better and better at building projects for a lower and lower cost, and getting them built more quickly too. So that's great news for everyone. But some developers are saying, I'm not sure I want to compete in the CFD. I'd rather sign up with a corporate. Now, the green agenda and corporates signing up to become greener and genuinely additional is creating a new market. And a number of parties are saying, I would rather sell to corporates than the other side. But those are really difficult transactions because if you're a corporate and you make widgets or crisps or something like that, energy is really complicated, and you've got to be advised well, and the board itself needs to make decisions about what does it really want. Does it want low cost or does it want additionality? And quite often they're confused about it. So that market will grow, and that's important for consumers because it takes, when you have a CFD, if you've got a 15-year CFD, that's a big exposure, liability on the government's balance sheet. So it's actually really good when corporates step up and sign offtake. So what we've been doing is building a pipeline of corporate off-takers and a pipeline of our own projects, but more importantly, third-party projects, to try and marry these together and build a market.
And hopefully these co-parties, the other ones you're signing a contract with, are going to become better informed about this market, and where they're confused at the moment, maybe less confused
I think
in the future.
Yeah, I think this needs to mature, and
Yeah.
I think what will evolve over time is a standard product for corporate PPAs. So it's kind of like, here it is. It's the same as the last one you signed, but small bits. You know, you don't want to buy half your energy for the next 15 years at the wrong time. It's a bit like going to the casino and flipping, is it red or is it black? So you need to be able to buy in small slivers. So you need to disconnect that from one large project, because they're just too big. But that will happen. That will happen. It'll take a few more years, but we'll get there as an industry.
And that all plays into the picture of the UK government's deliberations at the moment about what comes next in terms of market structures, and maybe we'll have an energy white paper again. Long promised. Maybe it will emerge. I don't know, do you have any expectations, Guy, for what you would like that to address? Where you see some of the sort of key gaps and challenges in the sector that kind of maybe act as a bit of a kind of delay on investment? When we talked about our friends across the water there in the SEC, kind of hopefully setting very ambitious, necessary targets on emissions reduction for the whole world. We've got to play that out into practice in terms of things like renewable energy production. So what should the UK government be putting in that energy white paper?
That's a good question. I mean, I think one thing that strikes you at the moment is the issue of transmission constraints. And I know in the energy white paper they're talking about competitively allocated transmission assets, things like that. So can we get a good competitive process to bring down the cost of network reinforcement?
So people are talking about that as also being an introduction of a delay, an extra kind of step in the process. So
yeah,
how do you see that?
There's always a risk there.
Potentially, maybe delivers it more cheaply, but might it also
delay it?
Delay it?
And I don't know what the answer is, Keith. I think, my view is try and have as many tools in the box as possible to try and solve these things. And then the other thing, I was talking about the batteries and the hydrogen. Can they play a role in reducing the need for network reinforcements? But when we look at the amount of renewables that we need to have on the system, we need both.
There's going to be significant hours with a surplus, aren't there, of renewable production?
It's a difficult question to answer in many ways, because either you go into the detail or you wave your arms about at a very high level. I think on the whole we've been very fortunate in this country, in as much that we've grandfathered different regimes. So having that certainty that when you invest, this is what it's going to look like in 20 years, that's the most important thing. And this country has been really excellent at doing that. So in terms of sort of very high level, I think the market, having just a pure market doesn't entirely work, much as we would like it. So you do need something where you can lay off 10 to 15 year power price risk. And there needs to be clarity that it's going to continue to be there, because it takes a long time to develop projects, several years sometimes. So you need clarity and solidity and consistency over the instruments, and the market will then deliver.
Right. So we don't want big surprises from governments, basically. No. We want sort of clear signals that are consistent with, as I say, what we hope have. Steady consistency, and we shouldn't rest on our laurels. But it's interesting, when I talk to my colleagues in other countries, they're actually quite envious of the UK and the clarity and the ability to access different parts of the market, which isn't always the case in other countries, not by a long way. So we're doing well, but I'm sure we can find ways to improve it still.
And I think a good example of that is what we've been talking about. The ESO's role in developing these new stability products, these new markets for the system services that are needed to integrate the renewables. And, I think if you go to other countries, you can still see, as you say, that can be a TSO type thing. It's kind of regulated assets or only for certain players, despite the fact the European Commission has stated that this should be an open market. And I think that's starting to percolate now, but I think Airgrid and National Grid ESO have into, you know, leading the way in creating those markets. So we applaud that. And yeah, as Lucy's pointed out, it has challenges in being an imperfect process, but at least it is a process that we have. And, you know,
and it's a bit of a challenge, I suppose, to the incumbent network owners. And you know, so what are the advantages that you can bring relative to them? I mean, you know, maybe you're kind of a bit slicker at managing the projects and managing all these interactions. Okay, maybe you haven't worked there to see what they're doing, but certainly this project seems to have been successful, this one at Keith.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've also got the Lister Drive project in Liverpool as well. So there's lots of learnings that we're taking from both projects. And as I mentioned before, as it's a Pathfinder, we're working on the second Pathfinder and the third Pathfinder. We're learning so much from the first one, from the commercial side and the technical side as well. There's definitely a lot we can bring to these projects and the communities. For example, at Keith, we're using local suppliers. We've already spent 1.6 million in Keith because our steel is sourced in the Keith area, and then we've got accommodation, your cleaning facilities. You're pumping so much into the local economy, so it's great, and that is something that we'll take away, and we'll make sure that we will do that in future projects as well. And there's also habitat management. That's something that we're really keen on focusing on at the moment, and making sure that all of our projects have areas of land that we can just develop for biodiversity net gain.
Yeah.
Very important, actually. Yeah. And I was going to come back to the comparison with other markets, Guy. You said you're working in Ireland, and the point that you made, Duncan, as well earlier about an inertia market. So in Ireland, I can't remember, they do have a kind of a different set of ancillary services, certainly in respect of frequency response and how frequency containment is done when we have these disturbances and the frequency might fall or rise. So yeah, it's different from here, isn't it? They've gone down a different path.
Slightly different. I mean, I think everybody has a frequency response need, whatever your system is, but it gets kind of mapped out in slightly different ways. So in Ireland we have 2 battery projects that are delivering frequency response, but the kind of requirement is the technical response is different to how it works in, say, in UK for enhanced frequency response or dynamic containment. So there are all these different acronyms for different.
Do you find some of them that are kind of easier to comply with, easier to kind of work with your equipment providers to sort of deliver that? Than those definitions of services are kind of more practicable from your point of view than others, or it's just different and you sort of have to work through it?
Yeah, a bit horses for courses. In Ireland, we're very much incentivised for a very fast response, so trying to get 150 milliseconds kind of initial response. But if you compare that to, say, the requirement in stability phase 2, where you've got a 5 millisecond response, then that's kind of, there's a massive step from 150 down to 5 milliseconds. So I think that illustrates the challenge of the kind of grid forming technologies to
we haven't really touched on that yet. In the last few minutes we probably ought to just mention that there are other technologies available, so you might want to go out and buy it. So although we talked a lot about the grid stabilizer, there are alternatives, one of which is, actually there's the potential for putting them and using them on wind farms. Where you talked, Guy, about power electronics kind of following what's on the grid, but actually there's a way of being able to sort of form what's on the grid, and it's all to do in the software and writing the controls, isn't it?
Yeah, and I think one of the interesting things about 9th of August event was was the software in up to date, or was there an error in the software for projects? Did they do as it said on the tin, as the rules said? The nice thing about a synchronous machine is you can't go and reprogram the software. It's got
physically
the electrical engineering is built into the wires and the copper bars and the iron of the machine. So you can't go and reprogram it and get something different.
Yeah.
So in terms of reliability, in terms of knowledge that if there's a fault in the system, that machine's going to perform. It's not subject to some of the vagaries going on.
Yeah. So we're just going to sort of wrap up the discussion now, and just to do that, I want to go around the panel here and ask each one and give a little bit of warning now. You can think about this. You're kind of, you're kind of your number one kind of takeaway or learning point from specifically the Keith project, and how that fits into the bigger marketplace? You know, what you're kind of taking from it and going to try and reapply it. So, Lucy, we'll come to you first on that.
I would say timing.
Timing.
Right. You know, this is the first project we did, the first program that we put together, and that's a big takeaway. You know, working with National Grid, understanding their timings, the planning process for these. So we've learned so much from this project on timing, and so we'll be better prepared for the next future projects.
Yeah. Guy?
Yeah, kind of piggybacking on what Lucy says, trying to be ahead of the game here. You know, National Grid wants to be zero carbon operation in 2025. If we're going to deliver that, you know, we've got to have a lot more projects like Keith around the country to do that, and just trying to get there as we were with the technology at Keith and as we were with the sites and so on, just being ready and driving for that to hit that target, because it's really important for renewables and for the whole of, you know, the net zero kind of program, I think.
Yeah. Last word to Duncan.
Yeah, I think the big learning point for me was what happens when you get to the end of the 6-7 year contract. You know, there's no market. So, you know, we need a market. Otherwise, you need to get all your money back. So that was the biggest one for me, and the fact that energy and inertia were all mixed up together.
Yeah, right. Well, thank you very much. So, thank you for watching. I hope you found that interesting. There's a lot more stuff we could have talked about. Maybe there's cues for other sessions on different topics. But for now, it's not quite as sunny in Glasgow as it was when we started, but it's not raining yet. Just across the Clyde from COP26. On behalf of Lucy, Guy and Duncan, and Keith Bell, rather than Keith, where the stability stabiliser is, we'll bid you farewell. Thank you very much and goodbye.